Okay, so Final Fantasy 13 came out about 13 years ago, and some people consider it a classic. Other people thought that it was one of the worst installments in the entire series. For the most part, people have polarizing opinions about the overall quality of the game itself. And, by the way, I'm talking about Final Fantasy 13 Part 1 because the game had two parts to it. Some people love Part 2 better than they love Part 1. And for some strange reason, some people like Part 1 and they did Part 2. But I'm just talking about Part 1 and whether or not it deserves a PlayStation 5 remake. Now, I don't think that's something that's on the tippy top of Square Enix's list in terms of remakes and upcoming games and all that stuff. But for the most part, Final Fantasy 13 is a game that I don't think that Square Enix is going to remake anytime soon, because despite the fact that the game was a commercial success, it was one that it was definitely not one of their best installments. Now, when it was released for the PS3, Xbox 360, and Microsoft Windows, I believe it managed to reach at least 7 million copies sold across multiple platforms. But the thing is, if you look at the game itself, there was a set of negatives about the game that seemingly overwhelm the positives. Like, for example, the main character, Lightning, was not exactly likable, and she was not a character that you could be emotionally invested into. Neither were the other characters and the other people who were inside of her party as well. Also, another thing that people didn't like about Final Fantasy 13 was the fact that when it came down to battle, you can only control one character opposed to multiple characters, even though it was a turn-based RPG. Now, if they were going to have it where you controlled one character and fought off multiple enemies throughout the game, it would have been better off being an action RPG. But for whatever reason, Square Enix did not go down that route. And if they ever do consider remaking Final Fantasy 13 for PlayStation 5, that's the route that they should go down. And a lot of people didn't like the level up system, and because I guess it reminded them too much of Final Fantasy X and all that stuff with the spear grid and everything like that. And yeah, for the most part, like, there was really no iconic characters in that game, you know what I mean? Because you look at iconic characters in the older Final Fantasy games, you think of names like Cloud Strife and Tifa Lockhart, you think of the Gull Wings, you think of Titus from Final Fantasy X. It's like, there's really no memorable characters in Final Fantasy 13 for the most part. And, it's not to say that it was a bad game. I just feel like as a standalone video game with a different name, outside the Final Fantasy series, it'd be solid, it'd be solid at best, because when it comes down to like turn-based RPGs, you should never have it where you can only control one character and have them attack when they're battling multiple enemies or monsters or anything. If anything, you'd be better off making an action RPG or a real-time, RPG type of game or what have you. But yeah, Final Fantasy 13, despite the fact that it was a commercial success, it's kind of considered like the black sheep of the Final Fantasy series as it relates to the 2000s decade. And some would probably even lump Final Fantasy 11 in that category as well, because Final Fantasy 11 was an MMORPG. It doesn't really get talked about as much. And I think Square Enix tried to do something different with Final Fantasy 11 with the MMORPG route, but it didn't really work out too well. And a lot of people look back and say it may have been ahead of its time, but honestly, Final Fantasy has always been better off as a traditional RPG or what have you. And with I think like with like their most recent games, like with Final Fantasy 15, I believe they strayed away from the whole turn-based RPG gameplay, and they're focusing more on, I guess, action RPGs, because that's the thing nowadays. Action RPGs is very popular. It's just as popular as the action-adventure genre of gaming. And I do feel that Final Fantasy 13 is one of those games that... I mean, I'm not saying that, Square Enix is not going to consider remaking it or anything like that. I have no idea, because in 2 years we're gonna have we're going to celebrate the 15-year anniversary of the game, and I believe that's going to be in 2025, if I'm not mistaken. And it does seem like Square Enix has bigger fish to fry when it comes down to like video games and stuff like that. We're still waiting for the upcoming release of Final Fantasy 16, and a lot of people are wondering whether or not it's going to sell more than Final Fantasy 15, but I don't know. I mean, Final Fantasy 15 was actually pretty successful, and it was one of the best like Final Fantasy games that Square Enix had put out in a very long time in relation to the main entry. Final Fantasy 13 overall definitely could have been better, and if they do decide to remake the game, both parts of Final Fantasy 13, they should probably try to get that done around like 2025, 2026, considering the fact that in 2 years we're going to be celebrating the game's 15th anniversary.